Hello, everyone. This is Professor Allen. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 14, which covers information security. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. Okay, so Chapter 14, information security. Let's talk a little bit about this. So we'll start with the definition of crimes on the computer, or an e-crime. An e-crime is basically a crime that involves a computer or a network. These crimes directly target computers or networks. Other crimes use computers to hack into other computers and networks. Computer crimes can involve a single computer or many computers, and due to the increased number of cyber attacks, information security has become a very hot topic and has a very good career track right now for people looking for jobs due to the never-ending increasing number of cyber attacks and worldwide threats. So most organizations are continuing to staff, hire, and fund and invest in information protection. So it is a very good field to think about if you're thinking about an IT profession at this point. It's a hot spot in a high demand area. So let me give you some examples of some computer crimes. So there are viruses, which you've all heard about, which is just code. So we're talking about a piece of code that invades another computer system through a program or a file. And when the code is executed, or typically when it's opened, this often happens for attachments, something attached to an email, something of that nature. The virus could make copies of itself or start to spread itself on files within your computer, within the network, and so on and so forth. A worm is a virus that has the ability to copy itself from machine to machine, normally over a network. A Trojan horse is something that looks innocent but isn't. So it's a security breaking program that is introduced into a computer and finds a way of re-entering the computer in the future. So it kind of sits idle until it wants to launch itself and then wreak havoc. Then you have logic bombs that are programs introduced on a computer that are designed to take action at a certain time or in a certain specific day or when a certain specific event occurs. And then one of the more common simple ways to attack a computer is the denial of service attack. And with this kind of attack, basically you're just sending a lot of transactions, and it could be legitimate type looking transactions, to a company's servers, overwhelming them in terms of traffic, and it basically just slows them down, and sometimes slows them down to a point where they can't operate and do their normal business. So a denial of service attack is typically just launching a whole bunch of other computers, sending transactions to a single computer, and maybe 100,000 individual computers you were able to spread your virus to, and they all start sending transactions to this one company server all at the same time, for hours at a time, and that basically brings their computer system down to a halt. And then you have social engineering, which is a couple of big topics here. Phishing, which is where people are trying to solicit sensitive personal information from you, sometimes in the form of email and instant messages. If you've ever gotten an email from some king or queen of another country who was overthrown, and if you could only provide them with your bank account number, they'll deposit $10 million into your account to protect that money, and or maybe they need your social security number, but they're going to be asking for something sensitive. and they're going to be promising something great for you. And this is a phishing attempt where people are trying to get information from you. Sometimes it's a phone call where people start asking questions, or they might pretend to be somebody else, and say, well, I work for your IT department and I need to reboot your machine remotely. I need your password. So people will just lie and cheat, and steal, and try to get information from you. We call that phishing. Spoofing, on the other hand, is where a website looks very much like your normal website and it mimics it, but at some point on that website, it's going to ask for something that is very sensitive, like social security number, driver's license number, bank account numbers, passwords, and it's actually not the legitimate website. So there are very good spoofing sites out there that look just like, say, Chase Bank or Bank of America. They look almost identical, okay? But if you look at the web address, you're going to find some differences in some problems with the actual web address. And that's a giveaway, as well as the kind of information that it's asking for. If it starts asking for things that normally wouldn't be asked for, then it's probably a spoofing website. Okay, then computer crimes by insiders, people inside your company, employees, business partners, contractors, trying to gain unauthorized access to your information system, trying to steal intellectual property, trying to breach your data center, your computers. Different types of techniques by different layers of protection. So you got perimeter layers, web servers, mail servers, encryption, virtual private network encryption, network-based antivirus systems. They all have some pros and cons. You got LAN security, firewalls, and so on. So there's a lot of different things we do to protect people's security, but because all of these protections were, invented by humans, humans can overcome them as well. So it's just a matter of time. There is no 100% foolproof system. Okay, some of the roles in information security, information protection. One is relatively new, called the Chief Security Officer, CSO, responsible for continually monitoring and assessing the organization's security risks, and for developing and implementing countermeasures or things to mitigate those risks and avoid those risks. So the CSO will typically have a whole department working for them, unless it's a very small company. And those people will specialize in different areas for protection. So since it's impossible to eliminate all the risks, the CSO must balance the trade-offs between the risks and the costs to minimize those risks. So if we spend unlimited money to avoid risk, and we went through every possible conceivable measure, you can really minimize some of your risks, but it costs a lot of money. So sometimes the cost to protect yourself is greater than the dollar value of the risk that you're protecting. So some of the steps in risk management: one, first determine the organization's information assets and their value. So you got to have an inventory of all of the things that you're trying to protect and how much are they worth. Information has a value. There are penalties and fines. There are, if you lose customers' data or it's breached, you may lose future customers. So there's dollar values to these assets. Determine the length of time an organization can function without a given information asset. Develop and implement security procedures to protect the assets. So here, an example here is corporate information on an employee's laptop. That's an important asset. So this particular example, they valued the loss of that information on average of $50,000. So there's intellectual property that could be stored on there that gives people a competitive advantage, or you might have a loss of customers or something of that nature. It's not the value of the actual laptop, that might only be a couple $1,000s. It's the data that's on top of it and the implications of what happens with that data. So there's a formula that we use. It's called the annualized expected loss, AEL, and it's a simple calculation. It takes the single loss of expectancy. So in that previous case, that laptop, it was $50,000, and then it takes that and multiplies it by the annual rate of occurrence. Like, how many times might this happen in a given year? So if that happened 10 times, then it would be 50,000 times 10. That would be $500,000, and that would be your expected loss. So if you were going to try to minimize that, you wouldn't want to spend more than, say, $500,000 to try to reduce that loss. So here's an example of $50,000 loss of laptop, very small company. Maybe it happens 1.5 times per year. That's only a $75,000 annualized expected loss. So then you have to figure out what should I do to try to prevent this? If you're not worried about $75,000 of loss, then you could do nothing. But you don't want to spend, $1 million of protection to save yourself $75,000 necessarily. Okay, and then managers estimate the cost of the actions performed to secure valued information assets. So the cost estimates and the annualized expected losses are used to perform some sort of cost-benefit analysis. So you can do a simple calculation, quantitative analysis to calculate this. Your expected loss, which is your annualized expected loss minus the cost of those actions. If the return is negative, then it probably isn't worth doing or spending that much money. So here's an example where we had corporate laptops, $100 per year for each of the 200 laptops. That's what it costs to protect them, with a $20,000 annualized cost for that protection. And the return on benefit was $55,000. So if you lost 1.5 laptops a year and it cost you $50,000 for each, that would be $75,000 minus $20,000 to put the proper, perhaps, security systems on your laptops, and you'd be a plus $55,000 benefit. So it would be worthwhile to spend $20,000 to protect those 200 laptops from a $75,000 loss. Okay, here's some examples of some security breaches. Blue Cross Blue Shield personal laptop was stolen with unencrypted data, and personal information for 850,000 physicians and other U.S. healthcare providers was stolen and used in who knows what manner. A hospital case where the hospital was fined $182,000 and another $250,000 for privacy violations involving 27 employees improperly accessing records. TJX credit card, 45 million customers' credit card information stolen over a period of 6 months. And then U.S. military computer hard drive with 76 million U.S. veterans sent out for repair. All that information was stolen. So people do keep a lot of stuff on their laptop. Personally, I would recommend that you don't keep anything there, and certainly nothing sensitive or confidential, but store things on encrypted, secure areas. You may store some things to the cloud, but having on your physical laptop, it's very easy to have it broken into if you lose it or if it gets stolen. And then some U.S. laws to help protect some of this. We got the HIPAA, which we should all be familiar with, that impose fines if confidential health data is shared. When you go to a doctor's office, one of the first things they'll do is have you sign a HIPAA form. Well, that data gets stored typically in a computer, and IT people have to protect that. There's some other ones here, the Patriot Act, Sarbanes-Oxley, and some California acts as well. Sarbanes-Oxley was a real big piece of legislation that was connected to a number of scandals with some very large companies. And it was really one of the biggest impacting changes in a long time related to records retention, IT audit controls, being able to prove company officers having to certify that their IT audit controls are good and will protect people's information. So audit controls are things you would put in place to ensure that things are correct and being protected in a proper manner. And then Graham-Leach Act mandates organizations maintain high level of confidentiality with financial information. There's financial privacy rules and safeguarding rules. HIPAA we talked about. There's the Patriot Act, which gives the U.S. government the ability to use tools to access information about individuals. Victims of computer hacking can now request law enforcement assistance. And there's a Senate bill in California that has a requirement that if information is stolen, it has to be reported no less than 96 hours after finding out about it. Some companies were not telling customers because they were worried about the repercussions if the customers found out. Each company should have something called an information security policy. This policy is a document that describes what can and can't be done or what's permissible and not permissible in the company as it relates to physical documents and information as well as electronic. So what kind of things should be in that policy? Access control policies, who can get to what, when user passwords have to be changed, who validates those, external access policies, and then physical access policies when you can like walk into a data center or you have documents that are confidential in nature sitting on your desk or in a file cabinet that's not locked, or having it on your phone and your phone sitting on your desk unattended. So there are a whole bunch of physical aspects to it as well as electronic. Other general guidelines, policies should be appropriate for the estimated risk. So back to the cost benefit, you don't want to create more constraints and additional paperwork than the risk is worth. So you want to make sure it's appropriate for the risk. Policies should be able to be modified quickly because as new situations arise, you have to modify them quickly, and they should be easily accessed and communicated to employees so that people know about them. It doesn't help to have a lot of policy and nobody knows that they exist or that they changed. Business continuity planning is a plan to ensure that employees and the business can continue to operate when faced with a major unanticipated disruption. Now, this is particularly interesting because right now, this is April 20th, 2020, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And this level pandemic probably hasn't occurred in a very long time. And I think maybe since the, maybe the Spanish flu, influenza, almost 100 years ago. We're in a case here where every company of any significant size, as well as governments across the world, are executing what we call business continuity plans. The business continuity plans tell you how are you going to operate if this thing happens. So business continuity plans for companies get developed for a lot of things. Loss of your data center, could be a major power outage, like we had across the eastern seaboard in the early 2000s. It could be some kind of natural disaster. It could be a situation, terrorism. It could be a case where tsunami hits, like at the Fukushima plant. Right now, what we're dealing with is a pandemic. and COVID-19. So most companies have, again, of significant size companies, medium to large companies, business continuity plans for pandemics. Now, they don't know what kind of pandemic's going to happen, but they have plans that say this, if this happens, this is how we're going to operate. This is what we're going to do. And for this particular pandemic, I think a lot of companies were caught with old dusty plans that really weren't well thought out. And then they had to go execute them because the pandemic became real. And they're having to struggle and figure out how to really operate in this environment. How do you keep your business operations running? And you notice some of the companies literally just shut down because they don't have good plans. So they stopped their businesses. Others restarted after a little while in a different way. Some continued the whole time. They just adjusted. They started social distancing. They started wearing masks. They started providing hand sanitizer. They started separating and reducing the number of customers in stores. And they've been operating the whole time, like the grocery stores and so on. Others started to operate via technology, like doctor's offices are doing, medical examinations via a computer screen and a webcam, or a telephone conference for a psychiatrist. So people are adapting, but these business continuity plans are supposed to be in existence to help you execute your plan when something happens. Because when something happens, you don't have time to develop your plan because that could take weeks or months. You need to have something ready to go. So for the pandemic, people that have business continuity plans, they just had to pull them out and start running them. Okay, what are we going to do first? We're going to monitor, we're going to check the absenteeism rates of employees. When it gets to a certain level, we're going to start temperature screening. We're going to start health check questions. We're going to do testing for immunity testing versus positive testing. We're going to reduce our number of people to no more than 10 in a given conference room, or we're going to send everyone home, or we're going to put people in reserve or sequestration. How are we going to quarantine people? There's a whole bunch of things to figure out. And that's what the business continuity plan is. It's a document that tells you how are you going to operate when a condition occurs. Now, pandemic was just one example. But as I said, there are many others that you have to be ready for, and how are you going to operate if it happens? That's what a business continuity plan is. So some of the things that it might include: alternate workspaces for people, backup sites for IT, evacuation plans, backed up laptops and servers, easily accessible phone lists and email lists. Just think, what if the phone services went down? What if the internet went down? What if your power was out? Now, how are you going to operate? So you've got to think through all these scenarios and figure out how to keep the business alive, because you can't just say, well, our company's been around for 100 years. We can't figure out how to keep operating. We're just going to go out of business. I mean, that's not a real good plan. So you really need to think through and have a plan for different scenarios and different business things that could happen to keep your business alive during a particular crisis, I guess. It's the best way to think about it. So some of the things that a good lessons learned is keep your data centers far apart. So you don't want to have a data center in the basement of your building, downtown, and then have your backup data center right next door to it in that same basement, and then have a flood or a pipe burst and take out both data centers. Or having a backup data center too close to your primary. So if that primary is affected, it's a good chance that the backup's affected too, whether it's a power loss or a fire or something of that nature. Plan for public infrastructure to not be available. So if public infrastructure is not there, what do you have in terms of private infrastructure? So where I work, we have our own internal private network that we operate. We use public networks too, but we also have radio towers and in direct line of sight communication, and we have state radios that are statewide that we can still talk to each other if need be. So you got to think through, how do I can't just rely on the internet to be available, public service to be available, public infrastructure, cable lines from the cable company, all that could disappear, then what? All right, let's move on here. So how much is your tolerable downtime? So this is something you got to think about when you're doing your business continuity planning. For each application or each system, how long can it be down before we have a problem? So this is an example. This is by no means the only way that you can operate, but in this example, it says we can operate for, as long as the outage is less than 12 hours, we can manage. So critical applications can make it 12 hours or less. Some of them might be minutes, some of them might be a few hours, but if they're 12 hours or less, we're saying that's a critical app, which basically means we better have this at a backup data center and be able to operate, or it needs to be mirrored so it's running in 2 places at once all the time. So you can mirror an application where you basically update a record on one server, and then a millisecond later you update a record on a second server 1,000 miles away or 500 miles away, and you're keeping a complete mirror image. So if you lose your primary system or server, you have that other one that's only a millisecond behind. Urgent applications got to be up within 24 hours. Important ones maybe within 3 days. Normal ones maybe 7 days, and the super low priorities maybe 30 days or more. So you got to figure out by application what, you know, where does each application and system fit, which bucket, because then depending on what bucket they fit in depends on what you're going to do about it. Electronic records management, ERM, is a discipline that addresses retention periods for electronic documents. How long should you hold on to them? When can you release them? Often it's 7 years or 10 years, depending on the type of document. And some documents you can just get rid of them anytime. Why do you care about this? Well, sometimes, well, first of all, it costs money to keep electronic documents around for a really long time. Secondly, if there's a lawsuit of some kind, somebody can use them against you, so you really don't want to keep them any longer than you have to. ERM managers are responsible for defining what constitutes a record. Okay, is a Word document that you wrote a record? Is a checklist a record? Is a form that the customer signed a record? Is, you know, what's a record and what's a document? What has to be kept, what doesn't? Analyzing current business environment and developing appropriate policies, classifying the records, authenticating records by maintaining accurate logs, and formulating policies. These are all important aspects of this. Oh, well, we're about done here. So that was the last slide. There's a lot to information security. This is just whetting your appetite here, what we covered today with these slides. But it's a very interesting field. It's challenging. It's very time sensitive, and it's a good area still for growth and employment if you're thinking about a career. So that's all I have for today. This is Professor Allen signing off. Thank you for listening.